Elwood is a kind and intelligent and, morally sound. He was, raised right by his grandmother Hattie, politically active, fully, a strong desire to be involved in the civil rights movement that's, taking place during the story. Overall, just a good, intelligent kid with a really, really bright future that gets kind of taken away from him. He had an opportunity to go to a technical college to further his education. And so while taking this opportunity, he is walking to school and he hitches a ride. Someone offers him a ride. And this is just a common act of kindness, and Elwood's a kind person. And who's to say that he wouldn't do something like that himself in the future? So he gets in, it's very harmless, and they get pulled over, and that's when Elwood discovers that the car is actually stolen, and he's gotten into the car with a car thief. And it's just a really tragic case of being at the wrong place at the wrong time, because he was completely innocent in the matter, but that didn't matter. It's still, the result of that was him being sent to Nickel Academy. Nickel Academy is, based off the Dozier School for Boys, which I believed was shut down in, I think, 2011. Like, what? It's ridiculous for, a place that is, that committed these atrocities against young boys back in the 60s. It feels like that's something that should have been, once things were uncovered, however, the second that they were uncovered, it should have been closed, and it should have been closed down. So for it to be a recent event is just, it's really heartbreaking. The experiences of the now men that went to the Dozier School for Boys, they're very real, and it shouldn't be something that's just, pushed under the rug. It's something that should be common knowledge. And so it's super important for, although Nickel Boys is a fictional story based on the Dozier School for Boys, it's still going to bring awareness to that real place and, all the other, reform schools that existed during that time period, and bring these men's story to the light. It's way too important. So when I read the script, it says POV. It was like Elwood POV before it, it was very clearly described, and I ignored it because not because I didn't want to pay attention to it, but I just really wanted to, be detached from all of that and just understand the story and the characters. So it was after getting it, I realized oh, this is all POV. Cool. Don't really know what that entails, but I'm in. I like the story. Excited to work with Ramel, and Elwood is a character that I resonate with. So I was just up for it. And it wasn't until we got there, and even in the conversations with Ramel beforehand, it wasn't even really, that wasn't the topic of discussion. It was that what really solidified it was being on set that first day and them presenting the rig to me and being like, okay, so the first thing that we're going to do is have you sit on this bench, you're going to wear the rig, and the camera's going to be directed at your fingers. And I was like, oh, okay. All right, this is what that means. It's they were really committing to this. It wasn't just something that they put in the script. And I was all for it. It was a new experience, and it was scary and very unfamiliar territory. But because of that, it also makes it really exciting. Turner comes from a very different background from Elwood that I believe has forced him to grow up a lot faster than Elwood, and so he has this more view. He has this view on the world that's, you know, for him grounded in realism in his experiences, and that Elwood sees as more cynical. So he is someone that's at Nickel and is like, yeah, there's no way to get out, and I'm just gonna do my best to keep to myself, make sure that I, you know, don't get into any trouble, and that's that. What Ingenue does as Hattie, good Lord. I mean, it is, you know, it's difficult as actors to kind of be asked to unlearn everything that we know and stare directly into the camera and find a face in there and find, you know, something to react off of and work with. But Ingenue does it in such a stunning and heartbreaking way. I mean, she's just a force in this movie, and I've told her like a million times, what you do in this movie, you don't, like, when the movie ends, yeah, you've got that feeling in your stomach, and that's because of the thing, you know, the movie as a whole, but she does a really, really fantastic job of, you feel for her, and you understand, like, the gravity of the situation that these boys are in, like what's been taken away from them. She does just a fantastic job. With Ramel, it was, yes, the trust, but it was also the confidence in the vision as well, that he could be felt throughout, you know, the cast and crew. And everyone bought into it because of that. You know, there were definitely moments where I had to remind myself, oh yeah, this is his first time working on, like, being the director of a narrative film. It was, the way he moved and the energy that he brought onto the set felt like someone who had done this, you know, before. And I think that all goes back to, like, who he is as a person. He's a joy to be around, and, like, it's because of that, it just trickles down throughout the set, and you want to. He gives you so much freedom to kind of play because of, again, back to the trust. I know you're hearing that like a million times, but it really is the most the most important thing. Yeah, he brought a very warm energy to set every day, and I was telling someone earlier, how could you not want to, you know, wake up and go to work and really put your best foot forward under those circumstances? I hope that people walk into the film with a very open mind and open heart in order to accept the language of the film. And I think that once that is done and, you know, they finished it, I hope they take a moment to sit at home, maybe take a bath, be alone with their thoughts, and then just consider all of the images that they were shown. I feel like there's so much beauty that can be found in it, in different moments between Elwood and Turner, and in moments like the opening shot with Elwood, like, looking, you know, with his hand, like, looking up towards the sky. There's so many really beautiful images that I think that I would really love for the audience members to absorb.
I'll describe Turner as intelligent, and I think he just doesn't think there's anything better for him in life until he meets Elwood. Yeah, so I think Turner is very alone and very intelligent, and somehow he does find the light within these situations for himself. Like, he can somehow make the darkest situation just a little bit more playful, a little bit easier. He can kind of sneak and maneuver and just try to situate himself in the best possible place, and even though it's the worst experience. And I think he sees a win in that. I don't think it really hit me until the first day that me and Ethan did our scene together, where it was the whole environment, but there's just this massive black lens that they want me to just stare at, and it kind of throws you off at first because you, as an actor, you kind of want to you're supposed to let the camera disappear and just be very present in that space. So and not be self-conscious or aware of the camera, but yeah, with everyone being so confident, it made it, quick to adapt. We got to play, we got to explore together beforehand, and then when we got to do the POV stuff, it just fell into place, and you just trusted Ramel with it all. So there's a lot of thoughts, at least when I'm acting sometimes, where they come in for a second, you're like, oh God, I hope that wasn't terrible, but I don't know, I think maybe even the POV kind of erased a lot of those moments for me because there was such a new element and so much more to consider. I never really thought too much about what I actually looked like. I don't know, there's something about Ethan's eyes that there's a power in there. So as Elwood and with that, it's a hope, it's that purity and hope and very kind of naive, just very doughy eyes. That's it's powerful. I would want them to go in with as little information as possible, but also as open as possible. So I think I would just give them that, tell them that this is gonna be an experience in a film probably no other film that they can compare it to, and that if you allow yourself to be pulled into it, which I think is if you just stay in the theater, I don't think there's you really have a choice. You kind of have to be pulled into it. But if you do allow yourself to be pulled into it, it'll be a beautiful experience, and I hope that you give yourself the space and time afterwards. Elwood shows up to Nickel Academy, where Turner's already settled in, and I think immediately in seeing Elwood, given that Turner's so intelligent, he can recognize this a different quality in Elwood that he is very aware hasn't been present in this academy, in this reform school for the entire time he's been there. And so I think that excites Turner. And Elwood is also extremely intelligent, which I think he witnesses. And Elwood also has that hope and that kind of naivete that I think maybe at first Turner thinks he needs to kind of stifle a little bit in order for Elwood to be safe in there. But then it ends up flipping, and Elwood kind of cracks Turner open a little bit, and then they have their moment. A beautiful thing that you could walk away from this film is that you're just now that you get to question things that you thought you maybe knew before, whether it be race, whether it be the way you interact with other people, or whether it just be the way movies are made, but that you now have some answers stripped from you and you know less than you did before, hopefully. I mean, first Ingenue was it's interesting because I watched her on set, and I never really felt like I met her on set because she was always very much in her zone. I think she was asked to do something. I think she was asked maybe to do more heavy lifting than Ethan and I. And yeah, just getting to watch her, and then getting to see how it turned out in the film was just so wild, because I think everyone in it, from Hamish, Fred, Luke, crazy, Jaquan, as I watched the film, I didn't feel like any of these people were actors. It sounds, but it just felt like everyone kind of lived in this world.
I saw Hell County, which was Ramel's documentary that he was nominated for the Oscar for. And I saw so much of my life, my experience, my culture reflected in that film. And I just was transported to home. And that's just such a rare experience. Usually when you see depictions of where I'm from, which is Southwest Mississippi, it just feels very voyeuristic, but that didn't feel like that at all. And so I started stalking Ramel. I started stalking him literally. Like, I knew that he taught at Brown, and I actually went to Brown. So I knew the phone number, and I just started calling 401-861 4000 and just trying to see if I could get him on the phone. I was like, hello, is Ramel Ross there? So really, anything that he would have done, you know, I would have wanted to be a part of it. But also, this story, this book, just made it just, you know, even more, my God, just strangely covetous. You know, I just wanted, it was just all the elements were there. And I think that audiences are going to look at this, you know, look at it in a really, it makes what's already profound even more profound, even more resonant. It's based on the true story of the Dozier School in Florida, where these kids were sent to, you know, reform school, and they were abused there. They discovered bodies of these children who were there. And from that, you know, they you know, kind of discovered the history, and that had gone back into like the early 1900s of this, you know, investigations of abuse that had been going on since the schools, since the beginnings of the school. And so this is what Nickel Boys is Colson fictionalizing the Dozier School, what happened at the Dozier School. But also maintaining the core of truth. That is the horror of that place. Our protagonist, our subject, our center is Elwood, and Hattie is Elwood's grandmother. Elwood's mother and father have left him, and she assumes parental responsibility for him. And she is a woman who she dotes on her grandson, and she's experienced a tremendous amount of loss and does not want to see it happen, does not want to lose her grandson. And so what we see through the course of the film is this woman dealing with her past grief and the very present grief, with the possibility that loss could happen again with Elwood. Elwood is played by Ethan Harris. And you know, I'm aging with him because the last time I played his mother. So now I'm his grandmama. I'll be his great grandmama next time. I played his mother in Ava DuVernay's When They See Us a few years ago, and I thought he was a delight then, and I still think he's a delight. He's just a lovely, lovely, lovely. He's a man now, you know. He's a little bit of a boy then, but he's a man now. You know, what I felt about it was an extension of what I felt about Hale County, you know, that it wasn't an outside eye looking in at black folks from the South. It was black folks in the South sort of speaking for themselves, which is something that's a rare, that kind of subjectivity is rare in film, period. So that's what made me so excited about it, you know? And I think that he's sort of extending that style in Nickel Boys. I mean, he calls it field work, you know, which I love that. And so what no one can speak about it better than he can, but from what my conversations with him is that the stories about black folks are usually, you know, it's kind of anthropological, you know what I mean? In this, you see it literally from our point of view, what we see. You know, what we have on screen is, and with Nickel Boys, the book, and then with this adaptation, is showing that in a way that goes beyond headlines, goes beyond journalism. We see it fully, how Black children are incarcerated and, literally for no reason. And there being, what happens is not, so it doesn't end with them going to jail. What happens to them when they are within when they are in those cinder block walls? And I think that is necessary for us to see, and it's also necessary for us to see the humanity in this young man in Elwood, and see it portrayed by someone like Ethan Harris, who is, love. I mean, just joy. I look at him and I smile, and everybody does,
The Nickel Boy story is a story about Elwood, first and foremost, who is a young African-American Black lad growing up in the 60s, and he unjustly gets sent to a reform school, and he meets a kid named Turner who becomes a friend, a kind of mentor, and they mentor each other, and someone who challenges him, and they challenge each other. And the story itself is about the experiences that they have, and a lot of them awful, but also a lot of them beautiful. Yeah, Hattie represents what I think to be, and pardon Coulson if this is not what you intended, but the sort of backbone of the Black community. She is strong, she's full of love, and she's been sort of forced to absorb the past traumas and not push them forward onto Elwood. And so Elwood's been a bit protected, and it's allowed to dream, and it's allowed to have a type of hope that Hattie's a little bit skeptical of because of obviously her past relationship to the system and the flood of racist actions. Yeah, Nickel Academy is based on the Dozier School for Boys. And so in North Florida, Tallahassee, it's a reform school that said obviously to be reforming the boys, to teach them good values, to make them ready for society. And you realize quite soon that the boys were actually fine in society, and perhaps not all of them really needed reform. And the reform that they were giving them was actually just sheer oppression and pain, a lot of psychological trauma, a lot of abuse, and a lot of shaping the lives of boys who would then shape the lives of others in society in a ripple effect that is incalculable and really devastating to even consider. I think the importance of the story now is not allowing what we know to have happened in schools, one, be forgotten, but also sort of keep it in the zeitgeist. There's some weird process that happens with art and information in which almost coming in contact with it allows us to almost assume that it's taken care of, or that that's enough, us knowing. But this has been happening for, I would say, hundreds of years across the world. And we find another school and we find new bodies and we're like, oh darn, I can't believe that happened. But yet we don't throw money to prison reform, and we don't throw money to prevent people from, or allow people to have the resources so that they're not, encouraged to do things that get them in prison. And it's all tied to a larger system that is kind of more interested in other things than, taking care of the most vulnerable. Elwood goes to Nickel Academy and meets Turner, one of the first people that he connects with. And one thing we, Jocelyn and I, when we were writing, thought how beautiful it would be if it was only them that could see each other. And that is, sort of both metaphor and fact in the film. And through the process of seeing someone, they, I believe, bloom and blossom within that gaze, and there's an exchange that happens. And whether or not that exchange pays dividends in the future of another is, I think, a lot based on the openness of the visual interlocutor. And so they have conversations over the course of their time, and they have experiences, and they learn from each other. And Elwood is challenged. He's idealistic. Turner is challenged. He's a cynic. And over the course of the film, through camera language and through dialogue, they kind of grow into one another in a way. Sentient POV stems from observational logic. And observational logic to me is kind of making the camera an organ and using it in a way in which it mimics or it sort of speaks the language of observation, and not observation in the documentary sense in which you have a wide view and you get to see everything and you're the fly on the wall, so they say, but more in which you're tethering the person who's viewing's vision to the way that the camera moves and the selective focus. And that is a connection that's kind of unbreakable. You're not allowed to wander as much as one normally would if you're using sort of just observational style of camera making or filmmaking. Working with Jomo was, I would say, a godsend. It was such a wonderful experience meeting someone who, one, understood what I was interested in, but also had their own research and their own understanding of what the image has been lacking in the past as it relates to the Black community at large. And when we started talking, realized immediately that we were at the same place approximately. And so, there was no sort of catching up but this is this and this is that. It was more, oh yeah, and this, oh yeah, and that. And that was great because we started to collaborate in a way that could push the vision forward. The editorial process was very much a process of finding. However pre-organized the script was, because the relationship between the images that we had imagined, the order of them can only be so mixed up before you're starting to change the way that Elwood is understanding the world. And so while the script was taken into the edit room, the book set aside, the script used as the Bible, working with Nick and Nick Mansour, who was our editor, and Jocelyn Barnes also was there the majority of the time, because I think for this type of film it really takes a village, especially with imagery that's juxtaposing across time in really fascinating ways. The meaning varies so much. Without multiple perspectives in the conversation, you can be led on a red herring of meaning in a way that's just isolated to the conversation that's happening in the room. And so, honestly, I think the most challenging part of the editing was the integration of the archival and finding the right moments in the archival. We had an archival producer who we hired before we started shooting. When we were writing the script, we were like, we need these types of images because we knew it was going to be a multi-year process. She worked with a former student of mine who's a stellar filmmaker, Alex Westfall, and they would just constantly throw me archives based on prompts. And in the edit room, we're trying to figure out the way that these interstitial images, the way in which we're trying to sort of retrieve the life from capture moments of the past that weren't in the maybe ideological direction that the film is in. Take those moments, bring them into Coulson's narrative, and have it mean something. One, for the person that was in the archive, and two, for the character and the narrative of the film. And that's a lot of play, and that's a lot of failure, for lack of a better word, and very, very, very time consuming. And I would say just deeply rewarding, because you're actually making meaning, and you're making meaning that's larger than the narrative itself. You're making meaning that loops the film into the system that produced the narrative itself. You're allowing the visual world of the past to contribute to why we're allowed to see, why Spencer is allowed to see Elwood and Turner as they see him. He wasn't just born, thinking those things. He engaged with visual images that produced a certain understanding of people of color. And so the editing was thrilling and challenging, and yeah, we'll never forget. What an absolute honor, pleasure, all the adjectives, to work with people as talented as Brandon and Hamish and Ethan and Anjanou and the entire cast and crew. I'd never worked with actors before, and so I just feel extremely lucky. I just wanna say that those two young men, I think, came so open and vulnerable to the tapes that they sent, that they immediately rose above some of the other people who were auditioning. I think Brandon was casted first, and we saw his tape, and he, to me, was the only one who wasn't trying to be Turner. He was just Turner. He was just Brandon as Turner. And I think when you're making a film that is based on the past, specifically on the past, in which there are characters that are just so familiar to us, the young black boy from the South, we have an image of what that person is supposed to be. And I think Brandon just transcended that because he was, as a human being would be then, just themselves. They weren't a performance of a character. They were a human being during the time. And we came across Ethan a bit late because we were running into sort of the same problems of trying to find that person who was just himself. And Ethan also was a no-brainer. Ethan's such a beautiful soul. He embodied all the optimism, all the bright-eyedness of the Elwood that Coulson wrote, which was extremely important. Like, those characters were, the way in which he approached those characters or built those characters was very, very, very important to the film. Ingenue, what a dream person to have in this role. She was our number one, which I love to say, because we got our number one and she was interested, and she still surprised. You know, it's quite difficult to play a mother, a grandmother who, I believe it's difficult, who is not participating in the same expressions of pain and sorrow that we're used to on camera. We wanted Ingenue because we felt that, you know, given her history and her track record, that she could be more of a dam, in that we could always see the power of the past trauma just at the brink of her expression, and she could sort of hold that back and like let a little bit come out and keep it, but not always break, not always scream, not always weep. And, you know, she would slip from, you know, we're shooting things out of order. She would slip from the joyous grandmother who is playing with a sheet over her son when she's in the hotel working as a maid, to the grandmother who is cutting cake, speaking to God himself, trying to find the strength to not implode given the recent unfortunate consequences of Elwood getting in that car. I'm interested in experience creation, and experience creation for an audience that's participating in the experience, not observing the experience. You can participate as an observer, and you can participate as an experiencer, which almost sounds rhetorical or semantic, but I think there's a strong difference. The camera use forces the person to be looked at by the person that's looking at Elwood with the macabre anger of someone who is willing to enact violence based on an idea. To be looked at that way is not something that everyone's been looked at. And even for those who are black and have experienced that, to have that seen in a cinematic space is, I think, so validating. It's something I learned through Hale County. If you can allow someone to see through the eyes of another and to be looked back in that way, they have no choice but to be pierced by the power of another's subjectivity, which is the thing that's most fleeting for us. It's like quite easy to be wrapped up in our subjectivity, and in fact quite natural. It's like maybe the only thing that's consistent across Western philosophy, the self. And bringing that to cinema, bringing that to experience in the context of Coulson's narrative was the primary goal of the sentient perspective. My former life / current dreams of playing basketball as a point guard are the foundation of the way in which I use the camera and believe in the space relationship between the lens. It's quite interesting to dribble a basketball down the floor and to predict where someone's going, or to have someone go a certain direction based on the way in which you move. And that sort of spatial acuity, if applied or when applied to the camera, first in the sort of documentary world, allows you to direct without words, allows you to get closer to someone and have them adjust and have them not quite know that you want them to adjust, or to make decisions in a way in which it's not as intrusive, and to read the visual field in a way that is just in your best interest as a person who's trying to participate in a way. And so Nickel Boys is an extension of that type of logic. It's using the camera as a human being would, and being acutely aware to where you're looking and what that means, and when you move somewhere, like kind of what that means, and following both intuition and the visual field sort of as it unfolds. My idea is to give someone an experience with multiple narrative possibilities in relationship to their, like the more you know about, Black culture or about symbolism really generally, like the more meaningful the film can be. But if you don't get it, you're still participating in a useful way. And so I want to like compact and continue to make the images as dense as possible and as beautiful as possible, so that it just like grows in the side of the viewer. Like there's nothing more interesting than that.
Nickel Boys is a film about following a group of kids growing up in what was essentially like a legalized internment camp for children in the South. So it was like a retroactive form of keeping slavery alive and well in the South, and mostly enslaving kids to do hard labor as in the guise of a school. When we meet adult Elwood for the first time, it's after he has escaped. We think that he's managed to escape the academy, and he's just sort of living his life and kind of coping with the ramifications of everything that happened to him there. We're seeing him sort of figure out how to be an adult and what that means. Really, like, one of the coolest things I've ever done. The whole film is POV, and so we're sitting with, at the time, adult Elwood in a bar, and a guy comes into the bar sort of down on his luck, and it's Chicky Pete from the old days who recognizes him. Elwood doesn't recognize him immediately, and then they start reminiscing on Nickel, and all we're watching is Pete. All we're watching is Chicky Pete and the back of Elwood's head, Elwood Turner's head, responding to it, and it was an incredible performance to watch. Certainly, as the person who got to play camera, essentially, like, just a really beautiful scene, and for Turner, the revelation that his experience was not everybody's experience, and that in fact, like, he assumed his escape, which is the most important part of his experience there for him, like, would be something mythological, and it turns out for Chicky Pete, he doesn't even remember it. So it's a big moment for Turner, and realizing that, like, this place was so awful for so many people. It's a thing he's managed to move on from. He's managed to not really think about as much. Has a business now. He's sort of cut that part of his life off. But that's not true for everybody. A lot of people are still suffering from from all of the things that happened there, and I think it leads to sort of Turner's position later, where he decides he has to speak out on the things that happened there. It was super cool. I mean, it's one of the reasons I wanted to do it, just because I'd never done anything like it before. But it's wild. They'd like strap a big harness to you and then like attach a camera to it. And the first little bit, they sort of showed me on a screen kind of what the frame was and how. So I knew, like, basically the frame is like my shoulders and head, and then things on the side and above. And so you do, like, there is acting in it, there's character work in it, but it's also camera work in some way. And so it's like, make sure that this person is in the shot, but you're also acting with this person. And it was a really interesting way to do something. It had a lot of the various parts of my brain firing at the same time. It was really fun to do. Ramel is, he's so dedicated to, like, the naturalism of this project that, like, I think even when things end up not like what he was planning, he's like, he just, like, it seems like, whatever, we've had 2 days together, but it seems like if it feels real, he's happy with it, and, like, in fact is willing to sort of, like, cater things to fall more and more down that rabbit hole, which is pretty rare, in my experience, to have, like, really the guardrails are not on at all, other than like the physical constraints of like the space and the harness or whatever. But yeah, it's just been, he's such, everything feels very real, which is wild when you're wearing a 40-pound thing that's like definitively not real. But it's like some of the more like realistic acting I feel like I've done, and I think it's, you know, we just did a bunch of improvising for stuff that like will eventually be B-roll probably, but we're playing out 10-minute whole scenes that we're making up just so he can get 30 seconds of reality. But like, as an actor, what a joy to get to come in and play like that and not be worried about, so much of what we do is technical. He does a really great job of like getting that out of our way so that we can just try to exist a little bit. It's really easy to sort of look around and be like, oh, we don't do that anymore, which is false. So there's a prison industrial complex still exists. All of this stuff still happens. This is a particularly well-told and heart-wrenching story of one of the ways that it happened well after we thought it was done happening. And so I think any opportunity to remember that is a good one. And then I just think it's also important to tell honest, personal stories about Black folks, you know, like, and with Black people centered in the story, and being emotional and vulnerable and honest and real. It is still a thing that, despite a lot of industry-wide talk about improving things, like it's still rare. It's still, I've never done a film like this, you know. So, and then also the technical, artistic things that he's trying on this are also, I think, really important. It's so challenging. I think it's going to be like certainly challenging to create, and then I think the immersive experience of it is going to be something that nobody's really had before. The camera is our eye in it. Giving that camera like not an omniscient perspective, but a human perspective, like forces you to sit inside that person is the hope. And so that kind of empathy is potentially pretty powerful. And then it also just, every shot I've seen looks so damn beautiful. And so sometimes you just, you know, you watch something or a film comes along that tries something new, and you realize, at least creators all of a sudden realize there's another tool in the toolbox that we didn't know existed. And that's kind of, for me, that's like the most exciting thing in the world.
Nickel Academy is it's a reform school for boys in the Panhandle, Florida in 1961. It's a fabulous conceit using the POVs of the two protagonists to really put the audience inside these young men's heads. Nickel Boys is a film about America. It's about our history, and it's about a part of our history that we would prefer to turn a blind eye to. Elwood's a kid who shouldn't be in this place. It's the sort of tragedy of the story that he ends up there, and that he ends up in a place where a person like my character is in authority. It's a period in the country when great change was taking place, and where a part of the country and part of the population was terrified of that change occurring. This happens in microcosm in the academy through the desperate ways the white people in charge try to break the Black youth who are put in their charge. There's an annual boxing match where the best fighter from the Black side of the academy and the best white fighter are put up against each other, and the fix is in. Spencer's going to make a lot of money off of it when the fighter from the Black side of the campus takes a dive, or he's supposed to. Ramel is the most relaxing director I've worked with, and I have not known what was going to happen most days when I show up. And I had a scene where I was supposed to be speaking. I had about this much text to say to a group of new young kids who are coming into the academy, and he said, okay, we're going to have an 8-foot alligator that's going to be in the back of the classroom that's alive, and we need you to talk for about 4 minutes instead of this length. So if the page-long monologue you have tomorrow, if you could do that today, and then just improvise for a while after that, while we get this shot. And I was not very comfortable with my dialect or having a large alligator in the back of the room and improvising for 4 minutes. But as the scene went on, I realized I was madder at myself for not being better at improvising and at my dialect than I was at my life being put at risk by the large prehistoric multi-toothed animal, crocodile. Well, I hope they're invited into a true story, a true piece of our history in a way that invites them in, they're gripped by it, and they hear it and see it.
My first thought was, how did I not know about this? I'm from Florida. The school closed in 2011. I went to school in 2011. I graduated high school in 2013. I was at a loss that I had never heard of this thing that I could have potentially had an experience with. So I was heartbroken to know that such a horrendous thing was kept a secret. And I feel like people should be aware of it. Nickel Boys is a film about young men who are put in a reform school that doesn't do very much reforming. It's a place of torture where they try to correct behavior with violence and terror. And in the case for the black students, there's a threat of death every day for things that are your fault and things that aren't. It's a nightmare. Griff is a bully. I know a lot of my acting teachers would say don't judge your characters, but it's hard to tell a lie about this guy. He's not a good guy. He has used his size to his advantage and climbed his way to the top where no one can mess with him. The only thing is, to stay there, he has to mess with everyone. So he's smart enough to bully, but he doesn't have any sort of educational intelligence. He's socially intelligent in terms of knowing what a pecking order is and how to stay on top, but book says he don't know 2 + 3, and that's trouble for him. So it's this annual boxing match that happens, and the Nickel Academy will fight other schools, and a lot of the talent in Nickel Academy lies in its black students. And Griff is the student this year who's taken on the responsibility of winning for the Nickel Academy until Spencer decides it's not worth it. From my point of view, it seems as though, although Spencer's school might win, if a black student wins, he loses. So he tells Griff to throw the fight. And Griff does it, whether it's conscious decision, whether he forgot, whether it's that lack of knowledge of 2 + 3, and claims he doesn't know what round it is, he doesn't throw the fight. He wins, and it's a clear victory. Not a knockout, but it's clear. And then he pays the ultimate price. I've never once considered a film being portrayed in this way. So rather than having over the shoulders and masters and 2 shots, we usually stay in the point of view of either Elwood or Turner. And what that does, in my opinion, is it creates an invaluable experience where you are locked and cannot escape from the point of view of the character. There's no, even if you were to hide and peek through your fingers, you're still seeing through Elwood's eyes, through Turner's eyes. And there's something sharp to that. You got to go through what they go through in this movie. So Ethan's playing Elwood, and what I think he's bringing is himself. Okay, when I met this dude, there was this warmth and this joy and this intellect and this intelligence. And I think there's so much that Ethan has in common with Elwood in that regard. There's also a hope to Ethan as well. Like, we talk about our favorite films or, I don't know, experiences we've had. I bumped into him in the gym once, and he was just all smiles. And there's a warmth to him. There's a hope that he just has in his disposition. So watching him perform as Elwood, you can see the shift of character, but truthfully, it's himself that makes the character shine so brightly. As for Brandon, he's also another hopeful individual. He's somebody with a very open way of communicating. He's so encouraging just with his eyes. So it's interesting to watch him play opposite and be a sort of downtrodden man with no hope. Kind of, I don't know what you're doing with all of that joy. It's really interesting to see him switch, but they're both similar in that regard, and it's fun to watch that dynamic develop between the two of them. So working with Ramel has been awesome. The man knows what he's doing, and I think Ramel has a good sense of tailoring his direction to the performer and the character the performer is playing. One of my most cherished experiences so far has been talking with Brandon, being like, oh, isn't it great how specific Ramel is with his notes? Oh, we were doing this one section where he gave me very, very specific instruction, and I was able to complete it, and then we were done. And then Brandon was like, what are you talking about? With me, he comes up to me, and we're talking character, and we're looking to discover this and discover that, and then we roll, and I'm just here experiencing it. I was like, wow, okay, so you and I both are being directed by two different directors, the Ramel for Luke and for Griff, and the Ramel for Brandon and for Turner. And man, isn't that powerful? Oh, he's just good at his job. He's really good at his job. As an African-American man, that's probably the thing one of the things I can be proudest about my culture. No matter what, we were singing. You go back a couple 100 years, we were singing. We got songs people still sing today. And when you see those kids smiling, even though some of those kids, some of them may have suffered and some of those kids didn't get a chance to grow up, there were moments of joy. And I think that proves to those with doubt that we're human. And that's what these kids were fighting to prove. They may not have known it, but they were fighting to prove their humanity.
I started the Florida Memory Project, has a huge archival footage, images of lots of 1966, 67, and a little older of Florida, and quite a bit from the Dozier School, which is what this was based on. So I just started there and pulled every image I could find that had people in it. I always like to base it on reality if it's something that is historical or actually took place, not an invented world. So I started there, kind of found as many images as I could find, and then through those photos looked like, after breaking down the script, oh, this photo makes sense for this person, this photo makes sense for this person, And then from that, dive further, so expand from the actual Dozier School or Nickel to just the time period and more what made sense in that time. So you start there with the reality, and then you move a little further, branch out, and just lots of research. Ramel and I looked at it together, and basically, in reality, you don't see the kids in uniforms exactly. So we kind of started there and then said, okay, well, we want to do it slightly differently. So the idea was that all of these clothes have been donated, whether government or whatever, they weren't spending money on these children. So maybe it was passed down from the white side and then 10 years old, and it's just been recycled and recycled and recycled. Hence why some of it is just so threadbare and basically destroyed, and they keep putting it on the kids. They really just don't care. It's basically to give them something. But then we, on the converse side, wanted to show that the white students had a completely different experience, which was true. Our black students were used basically as manual labor, so that's why their clothes are more for function than for fashion. So thinking that our story takes place mostly in 66, we went with a jean that is the shape of like the 50s. We got the 50s remake of a lot of the jeans. So thinking that, this is something that's just been washed, worn over and over and over again. And then typically with aging, you think, what has this person gone through for it to become this way? We did it from a kind of a different perspective, it's like, what has this garment gone through, you know? And that's why it looks this way now on this person, even though they've just arrived at Nickel. So it's like, how is it that aged already when he just came here yesterday? Well, it's that aged because it's been worn by somebody for years, all the manual labor that they're forced to do. So it was a different take on the aging process. So it wasn't so much what makes sense, what that character's journey has been, so much as what that garment's journey has been. Hattie is Elwood's grandmother, and we started with making her very classic grandmother of the era. And then Ramel wanted to shake it up and maybe make her more fashion forward, maybe, which in a way that maybe would be difficult for a woman in her means and everything at the time. So then we played around with the idea maybe she makes her own clothes, and she's very into fashion, reads fashion magazines, stays on top of it, and then just creates those looks for herself instead of having to have the money to be that fashion forward. So we kind of played around with prints on prints, you know, very anti-stereotypical grandmother. We wanted to make her a little more vibrant, you know, and especially even towards the end when Turner comes to deliver her the news, we kind of toned her down a little bit, but kept it in a way that doesn't feel like she knows something is coming. It's as if she was either leaving the house or coming home, so it still is something that she would have been wearing anyway, but doesn't feel like somber. We wanted it to feel, you know, just her everyday self. But yeah, we kept her much brighter than we had initially thought. We were going to keep it a little more toned down. And then we went in a completely different direction. A lot more fun, actually. For Nickel, we did different shades of browns and stripped away any color within that environment so that when we were in Mariana, when he's on the streets doing the errands for the school, or pre-Nickel and then post-Nickel, we wanted to see that there is still this world going on around them that is has life and color and vibrancy to it. So you see a lot of it in his classmates. You see the color of the time. And then Mr. Hill is stereotypical teacher, but in a much cooler way. You know, he probably wore a blazer to class. We didn't do one, or suit even, but he takes his jacket off. He goes in with his shirt and tie done properly, and once he gets in the classroom, he's like, roll my sleeves loosely, open my collar, loosen my tie. And I think he connects with the students in a way that other teachers probably at that time didn't. Then really we see Mr. Hill's coolness when we see him outside of the classroom, and he shows up at Marconi's when Elwood is working there, and you just see like, oh my God, he's wearing these like very fashionable sunglasses, he has this cool shirt on, you know. And I think it's just another reason that Elwood probably really looks up to this person who obviously cares a lot about him. Elwood is very buttoned up. Turner has been there longer than he has. He is comfortable in a sense in that environment. You know, he knows how to kind of work the system in a way. So they start out wanting all the boys very tucked in and neat and everything, but Turner is like, I'm gonna do whatever I'm gonna do. He stays looser, he's untucked at all times. Elwood is always buttoned all the way up, tucked in, and never deviates from that. So we try to just give them all their own little bit of personality that way. Griff, his pants are too short, he's much taller than the other kids. Pants are too short, too big in the waist. He probably cut them off himself. He always kind of has his shirt half tucked in, half out. You know, some of them are just, they follow the rules. They're scared of what will happen to them if they don't. Some of them don't really care. They're willing to, you know, push the boundaries. I think it's a very important story to be told, and I think that the aging that we've done on those Nickel costumes are it's very gut-wrenching and sad, but I hope that it makes people realize that people were treated this way. Children were treated this way. I mean, some of these kids were picked up for like stealing a pack of gum and taken to this school, and then some of them didn't even survive from it, you know? And there were tiny kids there. I think it started at like age 6. So I think it's horrible and painful, but I think it's important.
I read the book when it came out and was familiar with it before I even received the script. Loved it. Obviously, it's an intense read. And then when I got the script, I was immediately excited about it because I knew Ramel's work. I knew Hale County and loved that film. The research, I mean, the film is set in the 50s and the 60s, and then with some flash forward to the 70s, the 2000s, 2018, that kind of thing. But in terms of the bulk of the work in the 50s and 60s, I mean, it was just a ton of research into the period. I love doing research. I'm a super nerd for the research, and I love going deep into the old art books, into the Sears catalogs, into pictures from the time, but especially home videos as they exist, you know, Super 8 films, regular 8 films from families from that time, Polaroid pictures, all of that, doing a deep dive, looking into the archives in the period. Because the school is based on a real school called Dozier in Florida, there actually is a lot of documentation of the actual school. So we looked at all of that and used Florida Memory quite a lot for their documentation, keeping in mind that the photos that are taken of that school, as is sort of remarked upon in the movie, are on inspection day. These are not candid photos. These are not realistic photos. And the nature of documentary and documentation as a whole, you always just have to remember that the camera is there and that people in some ways are performing or creating propaganda in their images. So we use the Dozier photos as a jumping off point and an understanding, but we also used institutional schools, jails, etc., from then to now as a reference. At Nickel Academy, we basically used the bulk of the space there for our dining hall, our rec room, our classroom. Those were existing spaces. We did remove, I don't know, what felt like miles of drop ceiling, put in our actual period correct ceilings and pendant lights and that kind of thing. But the White House was a full inside-outside build. We added greens to make it feel like it had been there for a long time. You know, there was quite a bit of aging. We salvaged corrugated metal that was already aged for the roof to make it feel like it lived there. The showers also were a full build, and so all of that kind of rust and concrete and slime, that's all things that we built, you know, a few days ahead of time. I didn't want to create the impression that the Jim Crow South was some completely separate, warm, nostalgic space, and that when he gets to Nickel, that's when things really go downhill. When in fact, Nickel Academy is just a pipeline from the Jim Crow South to something that is expected in many ways for Black men, Black boys at that time and now. And so we decided not to create a sort of very separate palette. That said, I very much leaned into the kind of institutional sickly yellows and greens because that's the naturalistic color that is often used in these places. Easy to clean, easy to, you know, repaint, and it was just kind of a lean into the existing tile that was there as well. I hope when people see the movie that they're just immersed in the world, you know, and I feel like always production design for me is about creating a space where the characters can breathe and where you just are paying attention to that. And I want the conclusions that the viewer are coming to be pushed along by the production design, but not so obvious, you know? So in Nickel, you should smell the coldness of that tile, the shininess of those spaces, the emptiness of those spaces, and that should just affect the way you react to the characters. But it shouldn't be like, wow, how beautiful that ceiling is, you know, or whatever. And same in the Curtis house, it should just make you feel at home in these spaces, but you don't really know why necessarily. And yeah, I can't wait for people to see the movie.
I did not get the script until I think I already got the role, but they did in their self-tape email. They sent along some history of Ramel's, some of his work and some of his like interviews and stuff. So I got to see Hale County for the first time, and Yeah, I think that's what made me the most excited for this, was seeing his work there and just that poetic dream. So I was like, I want to do that. Yeah, and here we are. I think what makes Ramel the perfect director for this, and I mean, beyond his eloquence and all his massive vocabulary, it's his trust and like just warmth with everyone, like, and presence. Like, he would ask just everyone questions and he'd actually be listening to you, and you'd be like, oh, okay, oh yeah, okay, we're actually here together, rather than just like this hierarchy. He just very much leveled it out immediately, and there's so that trust just kind of makes everything.
Yeah, I'll definitely completely agree with Brandon, and I think another thing that makes him the perfect director for this is, you were talking about, you know, his vision. He had a really unorthodox and like brand new vision for how to tell this story, and he committed to it, and he made his confidence in it was felt, you know, by myself, by Brandon. We were able to, in the same way that he was able to trust us, it was very easy to trust him.
Yeah, he felt very fearless.
Yeah, yeah. Brandon and I first met. We first met at the chemistry read, waiting to go into the room, and he was just immediately so open. We started just talking about where we were from. Found out we were both moved to the same town from different places. We both moved to Burbank. I moved there from Massachusetts. He moved there from Georgia. So we had that kind of connection. We went to rival high schools. Like, it was, there were a lot of synchronicities when we kind of first met.
And they have continued.
And they have continued, for sure. And then we got to get into that room and play with the scenes together, and there was just sort of like this automatic connection there that they noticed, and I guess carried into the film. Yeah. I play Elwood. And Elwood is this really kind, really intelligent, politically involved and aware, and kind of wise beyond his years kid. He's really just someone that was active in his community, and someone that, you know, other moms and grandmothers knew, and like someone that you hear their name and you're familiar with him, and someone who had a very bright future. And so that kind of gets taken away from him in this movie, and you see that he ends up in the wrong place at the wrong time, and that's where he meets Turner. And at this point, when he meets Turner at Nickel Academy, he definitely has his guard up, and he's wary of everyone. So it's very strange when he first meets Turner, this person that's just like randomly talking to him after he's been rejected time and time again, and he only has the goal of wanting to be in that school and get out. So yeah, he meets Turner, and he's guarded when he first meets him, and they eventually start to affect one another and learn more about each other and their differences and their similarities, and their relationship grows throughout the movie.
Turner, yeah, I mean, he's very lonely, but also very intelligent, and in a different way. He's not so like well-read or well-informed or very active in anything large scale, but he's very intelligent on how to shift, even if his circumstances that he finds himself in are bad, he's intelligent enough to know how to manipulate those to make it a little bit more comfortable for himself, and only for himself. It's just survival, and maybe a little bit of what he might view as luxury in that survival, but most people would still see it as like, not that. And I think when he meets Elwood, it kind of, I think first kind of like there's like a spark of hope or something, because he can see that same intelligence or some sort of intelligence in Elwood that he hasn't been able to encounter in this world. So there's like this hope of maybe some sort of camaraderie or just escape from loneliness in Elwood. And then, yeah, they start spending more time together, and Elwood starts to terrify Turner with all his big ideas. And at some point, yeah, I think Elwood kind of cracks Turner's world open a little bit more, which is first scary, but then very much,
I think Turner does the same for Elwood, too.
You think so?
Yeah. I mean, we look back at that scene where we're painting. You know?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, you're introducing him to a very stubborn, of course, but
Yeah.
introducing him to a very different viewpoint that he has to consider.